Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're doing another video on helping you improve your chess game. I thought this time we'd do an overview of my chess tip of the day. Alright, so starting in 2009, I got the idea to go on Twitter and to put in chess tips. Now, originally, as you remember, Twitter only had 180 characters, and now it has like 360. So the first few years, first 8 years or 9 years, my chess tips are pretty short, and now I'm able to put a little bit more oomph into the chess tips. And I have all kinds of chess tips. So when I say tips, it could be a principle, the kind of thing that you would use in a game, like, if you see a move, if you see a good move, look for a better one. You're trying to play the best move you can. Or it could be just be a tip on something you want to do to help you get ready for a game. But I've covered the whole gamut, and I would say I've hit about 90% of the days. So if I've been doing it since 2009, which is 12 years times 365 is like 4,300. 90% of that is a little less than 4,000. So I probably have almost 4,000 tips. Now, are all the tips different? No, like I have some favorite ones like you can't play what you don't see, which every year or so I bring that one out and I throw it in there again. So if there's almost 4,000, maybe there's 3,000 different tips among the 4,000. Well, that's still a lot of tips. For instance, let's get out a couple of chess books that have tips in them. Let's get out Chess Rules of Thumb by Lev Albert and Al Lawrence. It has 332 tips in it. Let's get out Andy Soldis' book, The Wisest Things Ever Said About Chess. It's got 288 tips. So those are very good books. They have a little more information with the tips. They don't have a word limit, a character limit like Twitter has. So those are pretty good books to have. But if you'd like to spend a day or so scrolling back on my history, here's how you do it. You go to twitter.com/Dan Heisman, or you go to Twitter and you search for Dan Heisman or @Dan Heisman. And up there I pop. You can see it right now. I have it in front of you on the screen. Twitter.com, Dan Heisman. And all you have to do is scroll down, and you could scroll down forever till 2009. So I thought we'd spend, most of a video here scrolling down and seeing what we can find. Now, how do you tell my Twitter tweets from my tips? And the answer is it's got a date at the start if it's a tip. It doesn't mean the ones without a date aren't tips. It just means the ones without a date might not be tips. So let's look at my last three. My last tweet here does not have a date on the front. So I said the speed and accuracy at which Magnus Carlsen played the opening sequence at the end of the first game of the finals of the Crypto Cup versus Wesley So just now was scary excellent. All right, that's not a tip, and it doesn't have the date. The next one says the Internet Chess Club ICC is selling a series of my ICC only, not YouTube videos on thought process errors. Go to store.chessclub.com/videos/National Master Dan Heisman. Okay, now we go back, and the next one is a tweet that's a tip. It's M29. What's M29 mean? Well, it's currently May, so that means May 29th. So my tip for May 29th is never start a game without the intention of using almost all your time. If you don't want to, play a faster time control where you will use all your time. The first step to improvement is to try your best on every move. If you don't want to do that, you're likely to lose to most who will. Okay, so that's a tip. And now we want to do some scrolling. So let's go down. And now that you can see the next couple, like I'm going to be making a special announcement at the US Open this summer. So that's one of my tweets for May 28th. But if we want to go down till we get the next tip, we can see here May 28th. May 28th says, I can improve everyone dramatically and quickly at tic-tac-toe, assuming you're not already perfect. But unless you can devote full time to chess, like maybe an 11-year-old kid who that's their number one hobby, more likely your improvement will be slow and steady, which is not bad, but some get anxious that it's not faster. Okay, then our next one is kind of a meta tip. I say, for those new to Chess Tip of the Day, I've been doing this since 2009, so if you do twitter.com/Dan Heisman and scroll forever, you can get 3,000 plus tips. I suggested to a publisher maybe making a book, but he wanted me to add examples and diagrams, sort of like the 2 books I just talked about. Too much. All right, May 27, with more players returning to over-the-board play, some suggestions include more study time with real 3D boards to adjust your vision and practicing with time controls that will occur in your over-the-board play so you can use better time management. Next tip is some players prefer learning via eye, that is reading books. Others prefer learning through their ears, for instance, watching videos. Moreover, some subjects are better suited to one media than the other. Therefore, depending on what these issues are, using both media for various subjects may make sense. All right, I'm not going to go reading every one of the 3,000, obviously, so let's just kind of scroll down and pick some at random and see what we can find. Let's go down, a few months. We're still in May here, but as I said, we can go down for several years. There's April, there's Philadelphia Junior. All right, let's do some more scrolling. I always talk about my YouTube videos here. Okay, let's look at April 13th. The forcing moves are checks, captures, and threats. And then I show a link to a black cap that you could buy on Cafe Press that has checks, captures, and threats on it. All tactics start with forcing moves. So if you see a seed of tactical destruction, and there I have a link to my video on tactical destruction, in your opponent's position, consider forcing moves that can take advantage. The previous day I said, if you can recognize complicated critical positions, save time so that you can study them carefully and are able to analyze various forcing sequences, then you have a chance versus higher rated players. If you play those positions poorly, you can usually only beat weaker players. Next one says, in the endgame, the king's fighting power is about 4.25, but it can vary wildly. So if your king is stuck and the opponent's king becomes active, that can easily make the difference in who wins the game. Activate, use all your pieces all the time is a really important principle, which includes the king in the endgame. All right, let's go down another month or two, see what we can find. We're just taking things at random here. All right, March 18th. The first step to becoming a good player, try your best on every move. We've seen that before. It only takes one bad move to lose a game, so not trying your best can have an enormous effect on the possible outcome. Playing your best doesn't make you a good player, but not doing so will keep you from being one. All right, March 9th. If you like to study openings and sharp lines, then playing the open Sicilian as white with e4, c5, knight f3, and then black moves something, and then you play d4 is for you. If you don't like looking up your games afterwards in databases or books to see where you could improve next time, I suggest playing an anti-Sicilian instead. All right. March 8th. Just as a soccer or any other coach would coach much differently when ahead 6-0 or behind 6-0 than when the soccer score is 1-1, a chess player must employ vastly different strategy and principles when way ahead or way behind, and I suggest a video called How Not to Play When You're Winning Easily, and I have a link to that. Okay, on March 6th I said, although many servers only have automatic buttons for slow games at zero increment controls like 30-0, most also have a custom setting or something similar which you control, which you can challenge friends to any time control you choose, so you can play much slower, and many do, especially people that are trying to get really good. March 5th, since titles are currently only given out for over-the-board long time control games played under tournament conditions versus humans, it makes sense that if you want to someday get a title like Expert, National Master, or FIDE titles, you want to practice under those same conditions. That is, you want to eventually play over the board, you want to play long time controls, and you want to play against humans. All right, let's scroll down a bunch here. All right, let's go back maybe to something last year. Okay, right now we're still in January. I'm just trying to pick these things at random. As I said, you can go on forever with all these tips. All right, now we're in December. December 21st, the main goal of the opening is to efficiently, safely, and effectively develop all the pieces. But the king is the most important piece, and castling gets the king where it wants to go and helps a rook. So in most openings, castling is the single most important move. December 15th, if you can analyze quickly and fairly accurately, that correlates more than anything to your overall playing strength. The main other skill is evaluation. I might throw in time management as well. When I got to 1900 after 2 years of tournament play, my analysis skills were excellent, but I still had a long way to go on evaluation. I might also throw in consistency as the number 4. The 4 big skills in that sense are analyze, evaluate, time management, and be consistent in what you're doing so you don't have those large gaffes that lose the games. If you can do those 4 things, you're probably already a pretty good player, even if you don't have a lot of chess knowledge of openings and endgames and stuff. If you can evaluate well, analyze well, if you're consistent throughout the whole game, you don't have these lapses, and if your time management is good, you've got it. December 14th, in a 25-5 game or any similar time limit, for instance, those used in our Holly Heisman event, Botvinnik's rule is liberal, meaning instead of taking 20%, that is, of 25 minutes, which equals 5 minutes for the first 15 moves, it's better to take less than 5 minutes when you're playing normal openings. I learned this from Senior Master Ken Potts. Okay, let's scroll down a little. December 12th, a threat, a move which can do something beneficial next move, win material, mate the opponent, mess up your opponent's position or his pawn structure, and so on, if not stopped. A threat is only a tactic if it's unstoppable and wins material or mates by force. Make threats that either improve your position or can't be stopped. If you make simple threats that don't do anything for your position and are easily stopped, just hoping your opponent doesn't see them, I don't call that hope chess. That's just silly threats, and that's not a good way to play chess. Sure, against beginners that works. They miss the threats and you win the game, but against good players, if your threats aren't also doing something and they can easily meet them, then you're probably just deteriorating your position. Okay, scrolling down. See what we got here. December 11th. A quote from my World's Most Instructive Amateur Game book. It's tough enough becoming a good player by working hard on every move. It's pretty much impossible if you don't. December 10th. The pointing rule only makes sense if the 4 E and D pawns are locked up against one another. For example, E4 D5 versus E5 D6, or D4 E5 versus E4 E6 D5. Then put your hand across your pawns and it shows which side you have the advantage and where you should play a break move and attack. Alright, here's Knight on the rim, your future is dim or grim. Some take this too seriously. For example, if you have a knight on B1 and D2 is not available and you have a pawn on C3, then playing knight A3 and maybe later moving that knight to C4 or C2 is often good and much better than just leave it on B1 blocking your rook on A1. December 8th, making fair trades of pieces, not necessarily pawns, is almost always correct when way ahead. Even if you're only ahead 1 pawn, it's usually correct, but there are exceptions. For instance, if the opposing king is under a mating attack, and trading would create a tough endgame where you're only up a pawn. Okay, get some more randomness here. Maybe we'll go back a few months. We're in December of last year. We can go back years and years, but we don't want to scroll that long. All right, November 19th. Knights are path pieces. They need certain paths to get the desired destination squares. When you make a knight move, if it's not already on a destination square, you have to keep in mind the path or paths it can get to those squares. By the way, when I give lessons to my students and we get to a certain position where some of these principles apply, I say to them, what principles apply here? And I see how much they know and how well they can correlate the position to the principles so they can use those principles to help them if they don't know what to do. Now, of course, if they do know what to do, they don't need any principles at all. All right, here's one of my favorites that I repeat maybe once a year. Always play with confidence, aggression, and respect for your opponent's moves and ideas. That's one of my very favorites. The next day I said, when I started, I read about 2,000 plus annotated master games in books, and plus more in magazines in 3 years. Many years later, a student got to 700 games read, and he emailed me, the light is starting to go on now. Now when I watch grandmasters play, I have some idea what they're trying to do. So that tells you that, if you play over like 50 games, that's not a lot. You're going to learn a lot, but not nearly as much as when you start to get up into the many hundreds of games and you start to get a feel for what the annotator is saying, where the grandmasters are putting their pieces. Eventually, by osmosis and so on, it kind of starts to fit in a little bit. Okay. When you're ahead in material, one of the 6 things you should do is commonly quoted as trade, but this misleads beginners. A more accurate way to state this is, if you're way ahead, make fair trades of pieces, but not necessarily pawns. Sometimes you must trade pawns, and sometimes you must not. Okay, let's scroll down for another month or so. See what we got. As you can see, some of these might apply to you, some of them don't. But from my experience, when I teach people rated below, 1,600 or so, they really need to know a lot of this stuff because some of these things are really key, and you can never tell with a given person which thing is going to be like, oh wow, I never knew that, or oh wow, that would really help me a lot. You never know which one of these things are epiphanies, and that's why when you go through a lot of these things, a lot of these principles, then you might throw away a majority of them and say, yeah, I already knew that, or yeah, that's not going to help me very much. But when you get to those few that really help you a lot, you'd be surprised how much that really sinks in. Just a video about, just a novice nook or a principle about trying your best on every move and being consistent, what you need to do that, or the fact that that's how important that is. These things are really, really big for helping you improve your game. Okay, we're back to October. Another common misconception due to semantics is that the bishop pair means you have 2 bishops or 2 good bishops. That's not what it means. It's actually short for the longer phrase, the advantage of the bishop pair, which means that one side has 2 bishops and the other side doesn't. If you do have 2 bishops and the other side doesn't, that's worth roughly a half pawn bonus. If you don't know that, I've tested probably over 100 people on this. People who just started playing with the pandemic or playing when they saw the Queen's Gambit, and even people who've been playing in over the board chess before that, but people who haven't been playing for years and years and years. And when I say to them, what does the bishop pair mean? They just do what it means in English, which is having 2 bishops. They don't realize that the bishop pair means the advantage of the bishop pair, which means one side has it and the other side doesn't. And of course, when you're reading books and they say, here, white has the bishop pair, and you just look at the board and say, oh yes, that means he has 2 good bishops, that's actually not what the author's trying to tell you. Okay. All right, so here's one that's, for instance, on October 4th. I already had done an October 4th tip, and I came up with another tip, but I didn't want to put a tip number on it. I didn't want to say the date. So I gave another tip, and the tip is, it's not usually the things you don't know that hurt you, but the things you do know that you choose not to do, quote, because you have a better idea. I see this all the time in lower-rated players' games. They know they shouldn't, give away the bishop pair. They know the rooks belong in open files. They know this, they know that, they know all these things, and then they choose not to do it and have a better idea. For instance, a lot of my students know you're supposed to move every piece once before you move every piece twice, any piece twice in the opening, and most of the time that applies. Sure, there's exceptions, but they do it when they're really, really not supposed to, because they have a better idea. They go, boy, my knight really wants to be on e5, and of course, they shouldn't be putting their knight on e5 so early. They should just be castling and getting their pieces out. Instead, it's like, boy, I really want that knight on e5. Okay, October 4th, here's one that's a good one. If a C or F pawn can capture a D or E pawn, and the opponent, the one with the center pawn, cannot recapture with a pawn, and the note is, of course, as always, that capture does not allow a tactic, then it's usually correct to make that capture. So let me say that again without all the parentheses. If you can capture a center pawn with a side pawn, and your opponent can't capture back with a pawn, then it's almost always correct to do that. For instance, in the Open Sicilian, after e4, c5, knight f3, let's say d6, d4, it's almost always correct for black to play c takes d4 there. Okay. October 3rd. Everyone knows that losing a queen is worse than losing a knight because they have well-known average values that are published, like 9 versus 3. But not all non-valued bads are equal. For example, it is usually worse to trade pieces and not necessarily pawns when you're losing than it would be to get doubled pawns in many types of positions. So if someone said to you, you have a choice, you can get doubled pawns or you could trade off when you're losing, which would you rather do? You should quickly say, oh, I'll take the doubled pawns, but I'm not going to trade when I'm losing. All right, let's scroll down again. We'll try to get to something that's more like a year ago. We'd have to go several years to get back to when the Twitter is, only 100 and, what is it, 180 characters? 140, no, it was originally 140 and now it's 280. I think that's what it is. All right, so we're back to like August 3. A meta principle is to know and try to understand how, when, where to apply as many principles as possible. There are entire books like Soldus, the wisest thing ever said about chess, and Albert and Lawrence's Chess Rules of Thumb. And there's a ton on my website, and I give the link to my principles. Okay, July 29. If you have 3 to 4 candidate moves and it takes you about 15 seconds to figure out if each of them is safe, you're just getting started, because figuring out which ones are the best ones takes a lot longer than just figuring out which ones are safe. If you assume there's 40 moves in the game and you do the math, then taking 15 or even 30 minute games are way too fast to practice good thinking. And that goes along with my general principle that intermediate time controls hinder improvement. They don't prevent improvement, they just hinder it. It's better if you're getting into good practices and learning how to figure out if moves are safe and avoiding hope chess and all those kind of nice things that you can do. Once you get to be a good player, then playing 15, 20-minute games is fine. Okay. A mark of a good player is that he spends quite a bit of time understanding what the opponent is trying to do. For instance, putting yourself in his shoes. If I make this move and I'm in his shoes, what would I do about it? Tactically and strategically. If you find yourself saying, I didn't see that quite a bit, it's much more likely that you weren't spending enough time looking. Next one, spend time on the move chosen. If you have multiple candidates, A, B, and C, and D, and you analyze A, B, C, and you don't like them, then don't just play D quickly. If your opponent is going to spend 100% of his effort trying to defeat your move D, you should spend a reasonable amount of time making sure that he will fail. All right. The next one is short tips that are bad. Okay, so this was kind of a funny one where I tried to come up with tips that are not actually very good tips, but they are short, so I can fit a bunch of them here. Okay, short tips that are bad. Don't move pawns, they create weaknesses. All right, that's bad because obviously you need to move some pawns and you want to get space, and you're going to have to create some weaknesses. As I think Bobby Fischer said, you have to give squares to get squares. Delay castling as long as possible. Well, occasionally that might be all okay, but for most beginners it's just the opposite. You want to castle as soon as you possibly can. Dan says you shouldn't learn any openings. Don't spend time wasting openings. Well, I never said that. I said don't lock yourself in a closet trying to memorize entire opening books. But you want to learn tabayas. You want to look up your openings after each game and see where you could have done better next time someone plays that line. So, of course, you want to learn something about openings. You want to learn your opening traps and the openings you play. Never play speed chess. Well, that's wrong. Speed chess is a great way to practice your openings. If you play exclusively speed chess, you're probably not going to become a great player. You won't learn how to think right and so on. And if you get addicted to speed chess because of the adrenaline, that could be bad. But otherwise, I played 1,000,000 speed games when I was getting better. I used them to learn my openings and practice my time management and have a lot of fun. So, yeah, speed games are okay. Next one, your first candidate move is always the right one. Well, sometimes your first instinct is a good instinct and it's the right one, but a lot of times that's not so good. So unless you're playing a 1-0 game or something, I'd say, when you see a good move, look for a better one. Or if you see a move that you think is good, make sure it's really as good as you think it is. Next one is play only openings the grandmasters play. Well, that's not true. There's some very good openings that grandmasters are currently out of style with. And finally, never resign. Well, okay, resigns can save you a lot of time, and your opponents might actually go over the game with you if you don't make them play it all the way out sometimes. All right, I'm going to end the video here. If you liked it, hit like. If you'd like to subscribe, do that. But the best thing you can do is tell your friends about the channel. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye.